with fingers
No.
crossed.
No.
Okay, now this is your view on top. On the top right, you can see the word view. You can see that?
Yes.
You click on that, it says speaker view or gallery view.
Okay, Linda.
No, just click on it. Click on the word
No,
view.
I don't know where it is.
Top right. Top right.
Top right.
Yeah, that's on this side.
What are you looking for?
Top right.
It says view.
Zoom meeting. Is that it?
View.
No, view.
Oh,
Click on view.
Yeah. Okay.
And choose speaker
Click
view.
on view. Yeah.
Speaker view.
Oh, I see.
Speaker view.
That's right.
Yeah.
Then the person speaking highlights the screen.
Wow. I wouldn't have been able to do the thing without you.
Well,
That's
God.
so useful.
Yes, I know.
I think we should start, Anthony. It's
Okay.
31.
I'm ready to go.
Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Hopefully some more people will join. Well, already a sixth person come in. That is Stefan. He's back from his holiday. So off you go, Anthony.
Thanks, Chris. Good evening and welcome as always to another in the series Talking Hi-Fi, presented by the Cape Town Hi-Fi Club. Tonight's session is a departure for us. We're accustomed to talking about personalities active in the audiophile world, and we talk about equipment, about listening, about recordings, and so on. Our guest tonight, Maurice Gawronsky, sits where it all starts, which is to say, where the music we so enjoy is actually created, namely as a performer. Maurice has become a fixture on the SA jazz scene, more so in his hometown of Cape Town, where he's become known recently for his enthusiastic piloting of the popular jazz brunch at Sea Point's Winchester Mansions Hotel. But his extensive CV tells a story of a man who's powered the rhythm section for the who's who of jazz, both here and abroad. I'll drop just a few names. Stan Getz, heard of him? Oscar Pettiford, Roland Kirk, Wynton Kelly, Tommy Flanagan, Ronnie Scott, Johnny Dankworth, Tubby Hayes, and locally, Morris Goldberg, the Schilder brothers, the Ngukana brothers, Winston Mankunku. The list is seemingly endless. As you would have worked out, Morris is a drummer, so perhaps this evening's session should be called Talking Hi-Hat, my lame attempt at a joke. But truth to tell, the man has a CV of note, and by the sound of it, he's quite a raconteur. So I look forward to sharing some of those memories and maybe some of his thoughts on the thing that interests us so much, reproduced music or recorded music. So over to you, Maurice, and maybe you could start with telling us about that 13-year-old boy who somehow fell into the big time.
Well, Anthony, I must say I'm honored to be asked to do something like this. At my age, I thought it's all over, so I'm quite excited about this. Yes, it wasn't actually 13. 13, yes, was a part of it, but my father being a wonderful pianist, I had 9 uncles and 9 aunts who all married. So in other words, I had 36 first uncles and aunts, and every Sunday night, most of them would come to the house for supper, and what would happen is my father had a grand piano, and he would play, and they would sit behind or stand behind and sing with him, and it was absolutely music, music, music. And I think that spurred me on, because what happened is my father was also into antiques, and one evening I took some of the antiques down, put it on top of the piano, broke off some twigs from the trees outside and got different sounds out of it. And while he played, I was sort of hitting the ornaments, which didn't make him too happy. But I realized one thing, I really enjoyed what I was doing. And I thought to myself, I'd like to play drums. Oh, I don't know how old I was. It could have been 7, 8, 9 years old, because I was always so interested. But the first experience of playing or being with musicians. Can you take the dog away, Linda? So being with all these different musicians, and seeing them and hearing them, I thought to myself, what do I do? How do I ever get a chance to play drums? And one night, a friend of mine took me down to a club. I was about 13 years old, called the Navigator's Den. And they wouldn't let me in. They said, you're too young to go in, but I could stand at the window and listen. Eventually, I don't know what it was, but the bouncer came up to me and said, look, we don't allow boys in of your age, but you're so enthusiastic, go in and sit down. And I went in and I sat right next to the drummer. Well, fortunately, this drummer was known to really drink a lot of wine. And that was the night that he fell off the drums. When he fell off the drums, the band carried on playing. And all I did was I picked up a brush from the drum brush, and I stood at the bottom of the stage, and I just, in time with the music, hit the cymbal. And the pianist looked around and he said, hey, are you doing anything Saturday night? Would you like a job? Well, I'll tell you what, that's exactly as it started. Now, it was about 2 o'clock in the morning that I rushed home to my parents and said, Dad, you've got to buy me a set of drums. I've got a gig. My father didn't know what I was talking about, but all I can tell you was he bought me a side drum and he bought me sticks and brushes. And he said, I want you to learn the fundamentals of drumming first. Do all the rudiments, and then I'll buy you the rest of the drums. So I sat at home and I practiced and I did various things. And when he was happy with me, he bought me a set of drums. And I was about, I would say, maybe 13, 14, when I really started playing. And when I think about it, where I played and how I played, it's so many years ago that it's hard to remember. The one thing I do remember, Anthony, sorry, just to stop you. The one thing I do remember is we had a lady living next door in a block of flats. She was a honky-tonk piano player. Her name was Leah Korb, and I still remember this after all these years. And Leah Korb said to me, I hear you practicing on the drums. I'm playing at a wedding. Why don't you bring your drums and come and play? We're playing at Cleghorns and Harris. I don't know if anybody remembers Cleghorns and Harris, but we were doing a wedding there. And as we were driving down to Cleghorns, she said to me, you know, I don't realize, I don't know why I'm doing this job anymore. I'm now 72 years old and I don't need it anymore. I just don't know why I'm doing it, but let's do it. And we got there and she said, bring up my piano stool, bring up my music, bring up the Christmas hats that she made, and bring up the balloons, which I did, and all the drums set up. And she stood there and she told the people who were arranging the wedding, look, I don't want the piano here, I want the piano there, and I want this here, and I want that here. And she was absolutely moaning about everything. And I don't know why I'm doing it. And then the people started walking. And as they walked in, she said, hello, everybody, somebody stole my girl. And she was singing away. And I thought, I can't believe this. 2 minutes ago, she looked as if she was going to commit suicide. And look at her, how happy she is. That was my start of music, working with a honky-tonk piano player. Now you carry on.
Yeah, but certainly, do you think that a break like that, or I suppose a bit of an extended break into the business, would that even be possible or feasible in 2021 for, I'm thinking about the typical 13-year-old going out and coming back at 2 a.m. in the morning saying, Dad, I want to be a drummer. You'll probably be, locked up for 6 months after that.
Probably, I know. No, things have changed drastically, but what happened is there were many drummers in South Africa, or in Cape Town when I was playing. And there were 2 other drummers who they impressed me very much. And I'm going to say their names. One was Cecil Ricker, and the other one was a fellow called Monty Weber. And they were wonderful drummers. And I used to go to various places and listen to them. I was very, very impressed with them. And then Cecil was asked by a very famous piano player called Peter Nero to come to America and come and play with him. And he went over to America, and he was there for about 2 years. And he came back and he said to me, Maurice, there is so much work overseas. You must go overseas. He says, the style that you are playing, the style I'm playing, is very different to what they're playing, and you will do well at it.
And of course, at the time, and we're talking mid to late 50s here in South Africa, you were quite in demand when it came to visiting artists. I see some of the people you played with include everybody from Gunter Kalman to John Gary.
That's true. Yes, I did. Whenever they came out from overseas, people like Ronnie Quibell, who owned the Three Arts Theatre, told me, we're bringing out various people and we'd like you on drums. And of course, it was such a compliment to work with these Americans and Germans and people that I used to listen to, but I never thought I'd ever have the opportunity of playing with. So yes, I did that.
And around about the time I was being born, you headed off to the UK.
Yes, I did. And
just if I may, for the benefit of our viewers, that would be 1957.
Yes, that's quite right. Yeah. And what happened is I went over with the Union Castle Lions. In those days, they were the ships that were so prominent. And I went over, and when I got there, and I took my drums with me, and I thought I'll spend 3 months over here and just see what's going on. And I stayed at the YMCA when I first got there, because I knew nobody and I didn't know where to go to. And I found out where the jazz clubs were, and I went down to a jazz club, and I can't think of the name now. I can see the club in front of me and I can't remember the name. In the meantime, I went down to this club and I listened to a band called the Tony Kinsey Quintet, who was very, very famous. And when the bass player walked out, he said, "Oh, I was watching you." He said, "Clicking your fingers. You love this sort of music?" I said, "Well, I'm a drummer." "Oh," he said, "let me introduce you to the owner over here." He said, "Where are you from?" I said, "South Africa." He said, "His wife's from South Africa. Let me introduce you." So he introduced me to this fellow called Rick Gunnell, who owned a number of jazz clubs. And Rick said, "We've got a band playing in the interval. Would you like to play drums with them?" I said, "I'd love to." And of course, the rest is history. I never stopped working. It was very exciting. I stayed for 8.5 years.
Yeah, I was about to say, I see it lasted many years, that stint in England and Europe.
Yeah, it was England and Europe. Yes, there's some unbelievable stories of what happened, the luck. And I believe it's only, being born under that lucky star. That's what I believe. Yes, talent is important, but there's so many drummers, there's so many musicians. And I get the opportunity to work with the best piano player in London. His name was Dudley Moore. And probably you've heard of him, maybe not through music, but through satire, because him and a fellow called Jonathan Miller, Alan Bennett, and Peter Cook were the four fellows that started Beyond the Fringe in London. They brought satire to England. And just so happened that they asked me to be there with them just for the opening show. And the opening show was very, very interesting, because Dudley and I sat down in the pit, the musicians' pit, just the two of us. And as the show started, I rolled on the drums and Dudley played God Save the Queen. Half the people stood up, half didn't. Half of them believed it's part of the show, and the other half thought, well, we'll do the right thing. Then the curtain opened up. Peter Cook, Alan Bennett, Jonathan Miller, one sitting on a couch, one in a chair, one walking on the steps, said, "Tell me, who is this funny little fella who keeps playing God Save the Queen and rushing into the lobby?" They said, "Well, we hear he's with the Russian state circus." Yes, but I wonder why he keeps running in to play God Save the King. Well, he doesn't get much chance to do it over there, you see. This was the beginning of the show. And that was the beginning of Beyond the Fringe, which went on for a number of years, and they became extremely popular throughout England. And then they opened up a club called The Establishment.
Oh, yes.
It's well worked.
And of course, when you jumped over to Europe and you one day you're sitting in a little Spanish part of the world, and so who do you happen to meet?
Well, no, it didn't happen like that. I went over with a friend of mine. I went over with a friend of mine from South Africa, from Cape Town, and we went to a place called Torremolinos. And in those days, Torremolinos today is, it's a city. When we went over there, there were two little pensions, cobblestones, and we walked down to the beach and ate on the beach, came back. And one day we walked in to, we walked up to the B&B we were staying at, and we heard music from the other B&B. So we looked in, opened the door, and there were about 250 people sitting around, and there was a band playing. And I looked and I thought, my God, jazz in Spain? That doesn't sound right. From what I knew, Spain wasn't associated with jazz in those days. But there they were, 4 musicians, and the piano player really was talented. I sat there and I listened, and as he walked past to me, I said to him, I see you love Horace Silver. That's a very well-known American piano player. He said, how do you know Horace Silver? I said, I don't, but I know his music. And I said, you play very, very similarly to him. I said, but I'm a drummer. Ah, he said, will you come up and play one song with us? I said, yes, I will. So I went up and I tuned the drums the way I wanted. And we played a blues and I did a long drum solo. And when it was over, I felt I was in the middle of a bull ring. Olé, and people shouting and cheering. It was very exciting. And then here comes the peculiar story. A man came up to me and said, you know, are you going to be here next week? I said, no. I said, I've got to get back to London. So this friend of mine said, yes, you know, we do the London Palladium. This is Jack Parnell from the London Palladium. Oh, he says, I've heard of you. Jack? Yeah, I thought you were a bit older than that. So I kept quiet. I didn't say too much. They said, well, what we're having, we're going to have all the top film stars from America and England out here next week for the American network television. And wouldn't you do a 2-minute or 3-minute thing on the drums? I said, yes, I'd love to do it. Well, I met people over there. I met Richard Burton. I met Elizabeth Taylor. I met Mike Todd Jr., who was then married to her. I met a fellow called Peter Lorre. I met so many well-known actors of those days. Now we remember we're talking about 58 or 59. So I went up and I did a show, played, and it was absolutely fantastic. I was happy with what I did. And then I walked out and a man came up to me and said to me, can I introduce myself? And he gave me his name. I can't remember his name. And I said, oh, I'm Jack Parnell. He said, no, you're not. I said, no. I said, let me put it this way. I said, I come from South Africa, but they tell me I play a lot like Jack Parnell. So, you know, they just call me Jack. You're Jack Parnell. I said, so he said, look, I'll tell you what's your name? I told him my name. He said, if ever you come to Copenhagen, I'd like you to introduce you to Stan Getz, because Stan is interviewing drummers now for a tour that he's doing through Scandinavia. I'd like to introduce you to him. The next morning, we were on a plane and we left for Copenhagen before he even got there. Then I went down to the Montmartre Jazz Club where he was playing, and I listened. And then this gentleman came in and introduced me to Stan. Stan said, would you like to do a rehearsal tomorrow night with me? I said, yeah. Did the rehearsal with him, and he said, right. And I do remember this. He booked me, and we did a very, very up-tempo number. These are all little things that I remember. Very, very up-tempo. I picked up the sticks and I played, and he stopped the music. He said, I didn't tell you to play sticks. I said, well, he said, play brushes. If you can't play brushes to that tempo, then you're no good to me. I made sure I could play that tempo. Anyway, so yeah, 4 to 4.5 months I worked with him, traveling around Scandinavia, Norway and Sweden, and it was absolutely fantastic. And just to tell you that when Stan Getz came out here in around about 82, 83, my wife said to me, aren't you going to phone him and say hello? I said, you know, let me tell you something about Stan. I said, I have told you this. I said, his manager was the one who talked to us, who said good evening and goodbye. He never acknowledged us at all. As long as we did what we did, he would never have a kind word or anything. So he didn't know who I was or what I was. She said, that's crazy. I said, well, I'm telling you, when I left, I left. I didn't phone him. 2 days later, we were staying at my parents' home. My mother said to me, Mr. Stan Getz phoned you and said you must be at the Peninsula, the President Hotel. As I say, it was about 82, 83, and he'll be there with a few friends. Well, I couldn't believe this. So my wife and I went down there. We got there, and there were all the sort of the moneyed men. There was Aaron Searle, I remember Norman Figg, and there was all, as I say, these fellows with Stan Getz. They were all music lovers, and they loved that. And I sort of walked in, looked around, and then I heard him say, isn't that Jewish drummer? I walked up. He said, I've come to your country, and you don't even welcome me. I said, I must be honest, Stan. I said, I didn't think that you'd ever remember who I was. He said to all of them, remember who you were? He says, he was the worst drummer I'd ever worked with. I wanted to fall through the floor. And then he stood up, he put his arms around me. He said, lovely to see you again. Well, I want to tell you something. These are some of the experiences that happened. Then he said to me, I hope you're going to take me and show me the rest of the Cape. For both the times that I went back there, his wife, Monica, said to me, Maurice, he's not well at all. And shortly after that, he died. So, yeah.
He was a titan, no, really. A titan,
no, he was the best by far. He was my idol until John Coltrane came up, and yeah, even Stan Getz.
That's a whole different creature.
Whole different style of jazz, yeah.
It's Maurice. I was thinking you've travelled widely. You've played with some really big names, which we covered some of. But what do you think made them choose you particularly? Because, as you say, there were lots of drummers.
That's why I say, born under a lucky star, and playing what they wanted to hear. I believed I played what they wanted. They wanted, even here in Cape Town, all the fellas say, he's the guy who knows what swing is all about. I'm a swinger, if I say so myself. I like to swing the band along. But, it's funny. We were just talking tonight about, I was telling my wife about when I was in London and when I was working with Dudley Moore. Of course, working with him made you the most popular person in England, because Dudley was so well known that his trio was so important. He was now invited by a certain broadcaster to come and do a 3-minute shot 5 days a week on the BBC radio. And he was very excited. He said, listen, Maurice, we're doing this. This is going to be fun. Now, I wrote down, because I forgot everything, so I wrote down what I remember about this. So would you mind if I read it to you?
Go for it.
I think it's quite an interesting story. Okay. Around 1960, Dudley Moore was voted the best jazz pianist in England. And he was asked by Cliff Mitchell-Moore, who was a very well-known BBC presenter, for a 3-minute spot with his trio from 6 p.m. Monday through to Friday. It just so happened that one of the evenings, Cliff was also interviewing a young boy of 15 years of age who apparently had played with the Count Basie and Duke Ellington orchestras. And as Cliff knew nothing about drumming, he asked me if I would put a few questions to him about technique, which I did very nervously. I asked this young drummer to show me a paradiddle or a flam, or how to get a smooth roll on the drums, which he did extremely well. At that time, I was taking out a lady called Sophie Litchfield, whose father was Lord Litchfield. And this is all because of the Dudley Moore situation. So he organized a houseboat for me to live on Thames. So after the show, I dropped in to see her. She had a few friends there and they burst out laughing when I arrived. It turned out that when this young drummer was telling me what he had done musically, I'd asked him which drummer impressed him the most. And he said, Joe Morello of the Dave Brubeck Band. Without thinking, I then showed him a finger technique used by Joe, without realizing what this finger sign could otherwise mean and how provocative it was. So on arriving at Sophie and everyone laughing, it then dawned on me that I'd used the finger sign on TV in front of over 13 million viewers. So I thought I must just tell you that. This is exactly what happened.
I think I'd need to write that down just to be quite sure I got the story straight. Yes.
I'll send it to you. Yeah.
But that aside, I want to turn now to maybe a bit of a darker side to things. And, you know, there is something that does color our past jointly. And so making your way as a South African musician in those days, and as the years went on, how did the whole race question and how did apartheid affect the way, did it affect the way people looked at you and talked to you?
Strangely enough, it happened once. And that was when I played at that club that very first night in the break that I told you about when I just arrived. The fellow came up to me and he offered me a job straight away, a tall black American. And he said to me, I like your drumming. And we're playing at the American base on Saturday night. I'd like you to play. So I said, well, I don't have transport. He said, I'll pick you up, bring your drums. And I do remember that he drove at probably 80 or 90 miles an hour in those days. And I was holding on and I was so nervous. I thought, I've just arrived. Am I going to make it? Our discussion later was, you don't seem like a person who dislikes blacks. I said, well, why should I dislike blacks? So he said, well, the apartheid situation, the whites hate the blacks hate the whites. I said, no. I said, you've got it wrong. Can we sit down and can we discuss this? And let me tell you the story that, as far as I know, this is my interpretation of what it's all about. And we sat down and we became friends for the time that he was there. I worked with him for about a month, Saturday nights at the base that they played at, that they lived at. And then after that, you know, I went on and played with various people in great players in England, as you mentioned their names. And I was just very lucky. I just seemed to be there at the right time. I've had a fantastic life, Anthony. Really.
I think that kind of illustrates that, you know, there is, after all, a common humanity that does bind us, you know, irrespective of what your background may be. So this was London, this was the UK, the swinging 60s and all that.
That's
and
right.
What made you then decide to chuck it in and head back here?
Well, my mother came over a number of times. My dad wouldn't fly, so my mom came over. She stayed over on the boat with me and said, what a life you've gotten. I said, well, yes. So she said, well, we'd love you to come home sometime. I said, I certainly will. Then I became very friendly with a vibraphone player and pianist and organist. He became the organist in England in jazz, and his name was Mike Carr. Mm-hmm. And I brought Mike Carr and Chris Hilton back to South Africa with me to come and stay with my parents. And let's go out and show them what jazz is all about, because I realized that I'd learned so much over there. Well, they came, we did a tour around, went to Joburg and Durban and Port Elizabeth, and that was that, really. In East London, there was just very few places to go. And they stayed for about, I would say for about a month with me. And I got Mike a job playing solo piano at the Grand Hotel. In those days, it was called the Grand. I think it's called in Strand Street. The bottom of Strand Street was a place called the Grand Hotel. Yeah, near to Garlick's. Anyway, so I got him a job, and then they went back to England, and I stayed because I was so happy parents were here. And I thought, but what am I going to do in South Africa? Yes, there were guys to play with and that, but I thought, all my friends are married now. So how will I get, meet new people, and what should I do? So I came upon an idea that we would try and find a little place where I could have a club, a little, not a jazz club, more a folk club, because I realized that jazz wasn't the in thing and folk was.
Yep.
So we found a house in Bredar Street, and I spoke to the owner and said, can we change the house? He said, well, I live upstairs, so you can do what you like downstairs as long as you're improving the place. I said, this is what we want to do. So we changed the whole place into a coffee bar, and we called it the Troubadour. And this was round about 68, 67, 68 when I got back. And we had all the students coming there. What we did is we put Hessian all over the walls, and we painted it purple. And it was those days, and they had cushions on the floor, and they all sat on cushions on the floor. And we had big urns of coffee, and they paid, I think it was 15 cents to come in, which entitled them to as many coffees as they wanted. And we had a folk singer sitting on a high bar stool, singing songs. And that was how we started. And then people came to us and said, it's fantastic, but why don't you make some sandwiches, or it's winter, why don't you make some soup? So to cut a long story short, we changed it into a restaurant, the one part, and then we had a wrought iron gate, and we're the folk singers. So the people sat up there eating. For anyone that's near my age will remember the Troubadour, and then the folk singers would sing, so they'd be entertained while they're eating. And our most famous dish was steak troubadour. I don't know why I mentioned that, because I can't remember what was inside it, but I do remember it had something to do with crayfish. Anyway, so I had that for about 5 years. And then my chef took it over from me. And that was it, just carried on playing.
I'll bet that didn't satisfy your creative drumming urges, though. I'm sure you wanted to spend more time.
Anthony, I worked for 10 years at the President Hotel having a brunch. 10 years with the Jerry Spencer band. Jeff Wiener was the singer. Jeff Wiener used to sing, and Basil Moses was the bass. You must remember these names. Anyway, wonderful players. And so I was there for about 10 years. Then after that, I went to the Mount Nelson. I was there for 10 years with Alec Nocky doing the evening. I mean, I certainly stayed in places for many years and played. So being creative, I've always been involved with lots of musicians and spent time with them. And these have been my friends throughout my life.
We're going to get back to that in a little bit, but I'd maybe just like to tackle a couple of questions. I know you're a bit of a technophobe, but let's not go there.
I'm not at all. Okay, don't ask me anything about technique or technology. Okay.
I won't. I promise no woofers or tweeters will be hurt during the course of this discussion.
Okay.
What I'm interested in is, as audiophiles, as many of us style ourselves, we like to look at certain aspects of the music, and drums is certainly one of them. Whether it's your low end extension with the kick drum, or there's the shimmer of the cymbals, and whether they have a certain sound, or the crack of the snare drum, etc. But there's something that bothers me, having been to so many concerts. I've sat close to you, for heaven's sake, at Winchester Mansions, which we'll still get to.
Right.
And there's this, there's something about the live, the sound that somehow just doesn't translate into recording. Do you think that we do justice to that thing in recording?
I'll tell you what. As I say, I don't know much about this, but the musician that I work mostly with here is a fellow called Andrew Ford, who is a genius. There's no getting away from this. Besides being the most wonderful jazz, classical, honky-tonk piano player that there is, he's got a studio and he records beautifully. And he tells me things have changed drastically, and they can get the actual sound that people really want to hear on tape or on the stick or whatever it is.
But
So,
this is not something that keeps you awake at night.
no, no, don't worry me at all. I know it must worry you guys because, yeah, I know. I think it was. I don't know if it was Chris or the late Serge who used to talk to me about um, nothing can improve on vinyls. I still remember them telling me this, you know, and I was quite surprised because I didn't think that's possible. But as I say, everyone, look, people who've got the ears for this know much more than I do.
I'm interested actually in that comment because, you know, these people who supposedly have these ears actually listen to what guys like you put out. So, for heaven's sake, one of us certainly has the ears, and I suspect it's not me. But moving right along, um, could you
Right.
tell me a bit about what equipment you use? You know, is it certain brands, or and why do you use them? And what is it that you like about your kits? Just tell
Well,
us a
you
bit
know,
about your drum kit.
when I was working with Stan Getz, a very famous drummer from Switzerland, let me just try and think of his name because I know he's still alive.
Switzerland.
I can't. Anyway, he said to me, he was in charge of a drum called ASBA, ASBA drums. And he said, I'd be honored if you would use these drums working with Stan Getz. Have the sign on top, ASBA drums.
Yeah.
And I worked with those drums. And to me, that was still the best sound I'd ever got. And since then, I've had 30 sets of drums. Sold them, bought them, sold them. And I remember that having the best sound ever. What can I say?
And in terms of your things like cymbals and so on, is there a particular brand that you?
Cymbals, you know, they always talked about the Zildjian cymbal, and that is the cymbal to get. And I've never really, I've never sort of worried about if I've got the sound that I wanted. That was it. People said, well, you know, you should go down to various music shops and listen to them, but you can't because you've actually got to be playing with the band to get that sound that you want to hear. You can't walk in and go ding, 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 ding. You can't, it doesn't help. You've got to get the piano, the bass, and the drums together form this sort of unit, and then you get that sound. And the sound is so important. But like everything, all right, go on.
Yeah, I was about to say that you're talking about the rhythm section there, and you know, many a time the rhythm section is just keeping time. It's almost in the background for the featured soloist, but it is in reality, isn't it, an integral part of the whole setup. If it weren't there, then you wouldn't have the same level of performance.
Well, what I believe is all the reed instruments, trumpet player, everything. I think the trio behind them. And I shouldn't say it, but I like the idea of piano, bass, and drums.
Mm-hmm.
But there's some wonderful guitar, bass, and drums trios that are absolutely amazing too. But for me, I prefer the piano, bass, and drum sound.
I suppose the color palette, the range, and the dynamics, everything about it, you know, it's a complete entity, really. Who would be your inspirations, you know, going back, if one could look back and think about people that inspired you in your creative journey?
Well, yeah. When I was growing up, there were two drummers that drove me mad because they were so good. I just used to sit we had a little study and I had earphones on and I played to the band with these musicians. And as what happened with Stan Getz, a similar thing happened to me with a drummer called Elvin Jones, who died only a little while ago. An amazing technician and just a wonderful drummer, a wonderful person. And what happened is, I was playing with Dudley Moore at the establishment, and they had the Dizzy Gillespie band was in town, and they also had anyway, they were a big band and Dizzy Gillespie quintet. So some of the guys came down to the establishment that night, And while I was playing, the pianist turned to me and said, and I wasn't working with Dudley that night, I was working with a fellow called Brian D. And Brian said, "Do you know who's that? Who's in the audience?" I said, "No." He said, "That's Elvin Jones." I couldn't believe it. Played. And when I was finished, I sort of walked up to him and I said, "Elvin, I hope you don't mind me saying this, but I said, you have inspired me throughout my life." And he said, "I like the way you play." I said, "Well, do me a favor, please come on and play." He said, "No," he says, "I've got a night off tonight. Just keep playing. I'm enjoying it. But what's your name?" I said, "Maurice." He said, "Maurice who?" I said, "Gawronsky." He said, "Maurice Gawronsky." I said, "Yeah." I said, "You won't remember that." So we're in Germany. And I'm playing at a place called Tarantal. It's a nightclub in Munich. And I'm playing there with a piano player called Karl-Heinz Berger, who was playing the vibraphone. And a bass player who left South Africa with me, he died a little while ago, called Midge Pike. So it was just the trio playing. While we were playing, a black American walked up to Karl-Heinz and said, "Do you mind if I play pianos?" So Karl-Heinz said, "Yeah, but can you wait till we have an interval?" He said, "No." And he got up. I didn't know what to expect because we'd had so many Americans come there with beautiful new saxophones and playing so badly. So we were very weary of new guys coming in. As he played the first chord, I think my heart jumped. It was the most wonderful. And who was it? His name was Wynton Kelly.
Wow.
Wynton Kelly, if you've heard of him, I mean, so famous. He was Miles Davis's piano player for years. And he came over, he was with Dizzy at that particular time. So he said to me, "Would you like to come and see our show tonight?" I said, "Believe me, I'd like to." Say, brought the musicians, the three of us, to come. And we went to watch the show and we walked backstage. And a guy walked up and said, "Is that Maurice Gawronsky?" And I'm not kidding you at all. I couldn't believe it. I said, "Elvin." He said, "I remember you from the establishment." And it was such a wonderful, wonderful feeling. So what else can I tell you? I mean, these are all the highlights of my whole life. You know? That's why I say
we were talking about your inspirations. I think maybe if you want to, we're going to jump ahead to the present day. And who of the contemporary crop of guys and dolls? Because there are plenty of people of all sexes now of getting involved in jazz and drums.
The whole idea, because I don't have the energy anymore. So I'm looking now at a very
who of the young crop? Who of the young crop particularly impress you?
Yes, but there's such a tasteful drummer that whatever he does, and I've met him on the boat. I went on the jazz cruise, and he was on the jazz cruise. And his name is Jeff Hamilton. And Jeff Hamilton is the drummer with Diana Krall.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
He is the, you know, he told me the same sort of story. He was taught by a fellow called Mel Lewis from the Maynard.
Thad Jones, Mel Lewis.
Thad Jones, Mel Lewis, big band. Yeah. He said, "Mel Lewis, my father got him to teach me. And my father also wouldn't buy me drums unless I knew all the rudiments." And he said, "It's through him that this has happened to me. He has had all the work that he needed." He said, "I only took off when I wanted to. Otherwise, I could work 365 days a year. And I knew it because the most tasteful drummer there is." And he's playing a lot now with, all right, go on.
No.
Yeah, I was just saying, there's a thing I listen to. It comes on when I'm on Facebook. And then usually I get certain things. I think it's called the WDR big bands. And he plays a lot with them. This Jeff Hamilton. And I'll tell you what, I sit here and all I've got is, I've got a tom-tom. I don't know if you can see it. Yeah, tom-tom. Yeah, I've got this tom-tom. And I sit here with the music when they're playing. And I take the drums and I just play with it. And what I do is I practice paradiddles and triplets and flams and roll. I do all these things because So if the music is ding, 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 I go ticka 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 ticka, and learning these things. And I think with this pandemic, I may turn out to be a better drummer when I'm finished. Only I don't have that energy anymore.
That brings us to an important point here, because I mentioned earlier that Winchester Mansions and Jazz Brunch is been your most recent endeavor. But of course, you've sketched out quite a bit of history in that type of thing. Tell us a bit about the Jazz Brunch, and is it coming back? Because it looked very quiet the last time I looked.
What, the Winchester?
Yeah.
Oh. Now, I'll tell you what, from my point of view, they stopped in March because they were starting there to do a complete renovation.
Oh, I see.
The renovation is going on apparently till the end of September or October, and then we starting up again. So we've had lots of meetings and discussions, and they've said they don't want to change anything. They want me to handle it the way I did. And maybe you'd be interested to hear how I got the job at the Winchester.
Yes.
That's just very a quick thing. But I went in there one day for brunch, and they just started some music there. It was a rock and roll band. And the manager, who knew me because I played at the German club for a German school. They had a little German school, and I played there. And he was the, he was, I don't know if he was the general manager of the school or what he was, but anyway, he knew me. Hey, Maurice, how are you? He said, what do you think of the band? I said, well, to be honest with you, you're asking me, and I have to be honest. Loud music and good food don't go together. So he said, well, what do you suggest? I said, I'll tell you what I suggest. I would suggest the best thing would be a quartet, piano, bass, and drums, and a beautiful girl in front who's got a very good voice, singing soft, beautiful songs. He said, I've got money for 3 months. If you can do that in 3 months and really make it pay, you've got the job. And that's the story. 22 years. Yeah.
Well done. Goodness me.
So that's why they don't want me to change anything. They just carry on. And this old man doing his drum solos, and people say, how do you do it at this age? I don't know if I can do it anymore, but well, we'll see.
Maurice, I'm going to come back to a very, very slightly technical question now. You must listen to music occasionally. I think you've mentioned that you watch the occasional thing.
I watch it all the time.
What do you use to listen to your music on?
Well, strangely enough, I feel embarrassed about this because we've got a beautiful setup in my lounge with beautiful speakers in the roof.
Whose name escapes you for the moment.
Never use it. Never use it.
Huh?
I sit in front of the computer and listen to the music here. And I've always spoken to Chris and said to Chris, help me, tell me what to do. And he does, he helps me. But I think as we've discussed now, I think it's about time I combined my computer with the good speakers and set my drums up, put some earphones on and practiced that way correctly. Maybe you've made me think about something.
I don't know. If it changes you and what you do, then maybe it's not such a great idea.
All right.
I think we're nearing the end of this evening's chat. I've just got a couple of more questions left. I don't know if anybody from the floor would be interested in submitting a question or two. Feel free on the chat. But you talked about practicing. We've asked you what you listen on. What kind of music do you prefer? By the sound of it, it's going to be sort of mainstreamy, swingy stuff that you like, and jazz, of course. Are there other genres you listen to?
It's as I say, it goes from the bebop era, which I grew up in, the Charlie Parker, that sort of Dizzy Gillespie, that type of stuff. That's what I grew up with, and I loved that. And what I liked about it is the complete independence of both legs and both arms. You know, it's not it's not that sort of thing. You're moving, you're doing different things with both legs and both arms. And I liked that. It wasn't a challenge. It just came naturally to me. So I enjoyed that. And going from there down to the Diana Krall type of stuff, I love good music. Anything that I find is good, that I like, I find is good, that I like. What
You
else
know,
can
of
I say?
course, that many of us also listen to that kind of music, but we're probably not even listening to the music, but to the sound that the
Yes, I
hi-hat is
know, I
really.
know, I know, I know. No, because I remember I went up occasionally to Serge's house, and he had the most amazing speakers, and I sat there listening, and I know he spent many, many thousands on these speakers. But as I say, it was fantastic. But you've got to have the knowledge, and as I say, technologically, forget about it. I've got no knowledge whatsoever.
One thing we haven't dwelt on, and I'd like to just turn to this for a couple of minutes, if I may, is to the local scene and people that you've grown really impressed by and fond of in your time locally. I mean, who would you class among the giants, and who are those who interest you now?
Well, you know, yeah, the giants, as I say, because of my age, the giants are a hell of a lot of them have died. The main one is Tony Schilder. Tony Schilder was also, he knew nothing about music. He didn't read music here. He composed songs. He played that people loved him. Winston Mankunku. There's so many players, but Winston came out right on top. He was so well advanced. And then there were two brothers, Ezra and Gakana, and Duke and Gakana, trumpet and tenor player. Wonderful one. They all dead today. Hotep Galeta was a great piano player who played in America with also some of the top jazz musicians. He died. So watching the young crowd grow up, there are a lot of good players coming up, wonderful players, drummers, bass players, pianists, everything. They're just improving, and especially I think it has a lot to do with the College of Music, where my friend has just retired, Mike Campbell.
Oh, yeah?
His late father, Colin Campbell, you know, and Mike ran the school for many years, and about a year ago he said, right, that's it, I've given up. And he made a great success of it. And the girl who's running it now, Amanda Tiffin, I'm sure she's going to do.
Is that so? Goodness. Okay.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's my story.
Well, there's a whole new crop of young lions who are making waves. I mean, certainly technically accomplished.
I met one actually yesterday, a drummer. Strange enough, I was having coffee at a place called House in Newlands, and I was sitting outside, and I see a fellow walk out with his phone, and he say, yeah, no, and I played with Benjamin Jafter last night, and yeah, he's a wonderful player. And yeah, so yeah, well, we played this song and that song, and I listened. I thought, who's this now? Where's this from? So I walked up to him and I said, I'm sorry that I've overheard you, but I said, you know, I'm a musician, and I just thought I'd like to meet you, you know, what's your name? So he gave me his name. He must be about 22, 23 from the College of Music. And we started talking, we got on well together. He said, yeah, no, I've heard of you, I know of you, but I said, well, if you'd like a few CDs, I've got volume 1, 2, 3, you know, that we've got from the Winchester throughout the years. Oh, he said, I'd love it. So I gave it to him. And today I got a message from him that he's so enjoyed it and so impressed and loved to have coffee again with me. A fella, his name is Ben Berger. I've never heard of him before. He plays drums, 21 or 22. So, you know, yes, there are plenty of these guys coming up.
So yeah, tell us about those CDs. I mean, have you got any personal CDs of your own performances outside of that?
These are my own, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you know, it's with various bands that I've worked with at the Winchester. It's all different bands, but I'm the drummer on all of them. So.
And does one get them at the normal? Well, you know, there aren't very many CD places these days. I mean, can you get them online?
That is the problem. That's the problem. No. But you can phone me. I'll get you one. There's no problem there.
Okay, well, maybe we should advertise that more widely because, it's the man's got to eat.
Well, listen, let me tell you something. I made thousands of them and we've sold, seriously, if I've had 3,000, we've sold a good 2,000 of them already.
Okay.
So it doesn't really matter, because I know at the Winchester, I talk to the people and say, if you like this sort of music, here's CDs. And of course, now with CDs, being out of favor, well, it's now.
Indeed.
Yeah, it's very difficult. It's a difficult situation because people, they'll buy it because some people still have things, or otherwise they just convert it or whatever. So they do it, And I think they like to know it's got the photo of the Winchester and the musicians and what they've played and who they are. So yeah, they like it because they've had a very good day there.
All right. Well, I have just a couple more questions. And the first one would be, what's your advice to young musicians starting out besides practice, 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 and get lucky?
If they had the opportunity to go to the College of Music, I'd say that is absolutely prime because they really learn everything about it. And when they're 22, 23 years old, they can read anything and they can go anywhere in the world and make music their career.
And my final question to wrap up the evening, and by the way, it's been a great stagger down memory lane at times, but it was wonderful.
It's been hard for me to remember these things, Anthony.
It was wonderful to share those experiences with you. My final question then is, what would you still like to accomplish musically speaking?
I can't answer that. I really can't answer that because as far as I'm concerned, I think I've done everything I've ever wanted to do, and I don't mind resting on my laurels.
I think that is an apt note on which to end the formal part of proceedings. A man who's satisfied that he's done as much as he could possibly have done. One couldn't ask for more. Maurice, it's been an absolute pleasure. It's been a tonic, fascinating. And if the viewers had the opportunity to look at some of those pictures, those historical pictures from the archives, my goodness, I think in time you see this is going to be on a website, so they'll have the opportunity to do that. But thank you for making the time. And I think if any of our viewers have questions they'd like to direct to you, maybe Chris would like to open the floor. If you're happy to stay with us for a few minutes longer.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, anybody can chat.
Maurice?
Yes.
Was the Troubadour restaurant next door to the Guardian shopping centre?
Absolutely.
Okay, and you used to have a red light or something outside the door.
I don't know if it was red. I don't know if it was red.
And on Sunday nights,
we did have a light. You're quite right. There was a light outside the club. Yeah.
And on Sunday nights, it was soup and rolls and jazz.
Well, yes, possibly, because I'll tell you what happened is I got back when just after Chris Barnard had done the first heart transplant or maybe a year or two, and he had a big seminar and he asked me if he could use the Troubadour to bring all these heart surgeons who come from various parts of America to listen to the folk singers and sit on the cushions on the ground. And that's what they did. And he gave me a photograph of the whole crowd enjoying themselves at the Troubadour, which we had framed and put up on the wall. Needless to say, when I sold it to my friend Lucas, who was the chef, I don't know whatever happened. Lucas passed away and I don't know what happened to it. But yes, that's another story for another time. Chris Barnard, the friendship that we had he was a very, very nice bloke. And yeah, as I say, it's another story.
Nice to listen to you.
So you remembered the Troubadour?
Very, very much. Very much.
Yes, I know.
It became a rather naughty place sometimes.
That was after I left.
Of course.
Yeah, But it's I hear it's an Italian restaurant today, so
Yes,
I've never
that's
been
right.
back there. Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Well, if there are no further questions, I think let's call it a night. And
Well, thanks, Anthony. Thank you very much, and
Thank you, Maurice.
for the people
thank
who
you, Maurice. I
stayed
mean,
listening.
honestly,
Yeah.
the pleasure is entirely ours. And for the viewers who'd like to get another bite at the cherry, of course, as Chris said, this is going to be up on our YouTube channel. We'll advertise it on the AV forums, and I'll put it on our Facebook page as well for those who'd like to go back and relive some of those memories. And Maurice, more power to your elbow. Thanks again.
Good. Thank you very
Thanks.
much, Anthony. Thanks to
Bye-bye.
everyone.
Thank
Bye.
you.